The Eagles made 3 roster moves that quietly tell you a lot about where this team really is heading into this wildcard matchup, and if you've been paying close attention, you can feel how thin the margins are right now. Philadelphia placed defensive back Brandon Johnson on the practice squad injured list after he suffered an ankle injury while starting at safety against Washington in Week 18. This wasn't just another depth move. Inside the building, Johnson had been earning real respect for his work on the practice squad and scout team throughout the season, and his elevation for that game wasn't accidental. It was necessity. Andre Sam had already hit his maximum number of regular season elevations, which forced the Eagles to turn to Johnson in the first place. Now, with Johnson hurt, the safety depth becomes a real conversation as the playoffs begin, even though postseason rules allow teams to elevate players without the same restrictions. Still, Johnson won't factor into that because of the injury, and that changes the math immediately. Smash the like button to show some support for the channel, and let's go all in. At the same time, the Eagles brought back Perry Nickerson, and his story almost defines the churn at the bottom of an NFL roster. Released on final cutdown day, re-signed to the practice squad, elevated to the active roster when injuries hit, released again, signed again, released again, and now back once more. At 31 years old, Nickerson has been everywhere, but the Eagles clearly trust him enough to keep pulling him back into the mix. That matters now because he could realistically be one of those practice squad elevations in the playoffs, especially with uncertainty in the secondary. The third move was releasing Ambry Thomas from the practice squad. Thomas, a former third-round pick by San Francisco, never found consistency, battled injuries, and struggled with confidence after being benched during the Super Bowl run. His exit is another reminder that pedigree means nothing if you can't stabilize your play when opportunities come. But the biggest storyline hovering over everything is Lane Johnson. According to reports cited by the team, Lane Johnson is expected to practice for the first time since suffering his Lisfranc foot injury back on November 16th. This isn't just about getting a Pro Bowl right tackle back. The numbers tell you exactly how much he means. The Eagles went 3-4 in the 7 games he missed, and across his 13-year career, they are 18-28 in games he hasn't played. That's not coincidence. That's structural. Lane Johnson has missed just 1 playoff game in his entire Eagles career, and that was the wild card loss to Seattle after the 2019 season. Since then, the Eagles haven't lost a home playoff game. Even when he was injured during the Super Bowl run, he delayed surgery to stay on the field. His presence changes how Jalen Hurts operates, how the offensive line communicates, and how confident the offense feels snap to snap. There's a calm that comes with having him out there, especially in pass protection, and that calm has been missing.
Defensively, Vic Fangio expects Nakobe Dean to return from his hamstring injury, and that may end up being just as important as any offensive development. Dean is one of the Eagles' best run defenders at linebacker and a capable blitzer, and his return comes against a San Francisco offense that depends on establishing the run to unlock everything else. When the 49ers can't run, their offense stalls, and we saw that clearly in their loss to Seattle, where they struggled to move the ball and picked up first downs on only half of their drives. That wasn't about Christian McCaffrey suddenly declining. It was about offensive line issues and a lack of push up front, something that has also affected Saquon Barkley this season. Nakobe Dean's return directly targets that weakness. The matchup details only reinforce this. San Francisco is banged up at linebacker to the point where they had to sign former Eagle Kazir White just to field bodies, and they're expected to start Eric Kendricks and Curtis Robinson, who had been a healthy scratch recently due to coverage struggles. That's an area the Eagles have to exploit. Running the football, attacking the middle of the field, and targeting linebackers with crossers and tight end routes isn't optional, it's mandatory. Dallas Goedert becomes a central figure here, especially given how depleted the 49ers are in the middle. The numbers on Jalen Hurts throwing crossers are elite, yet the Eagles ran them at a bottom 5 rate this season, a disconnect that can't continue in a playoff environment. On the other side, this chess match between Kyle Shanahan and Vic Fangio is fascinating. Shanahan has faced Fangio only 4 times, and his offenses have struggled to score, even though those games came with very different quarterbacks. Fangio himself has praised Shanahan's scheme, calling it one of the best in the league, fully packaged with motion and purpose. Since Week 8, the Eagles' defense has allowed just 14.5 points per game, and Brock Purdy's track record against top 10 defenses shows real volatility, especially in recent seasons. This is not a comfortable matchup for San Francisco, particularly in the trenches, where Philadelphia believes it has a clear advantage. All of this paints a picture of an Eagles team walking into the playoffs with questions, but also with very real reasons for confidence if key pieces return at the right time and the coaching staff leans into the matchups that are clearly there. Based on everything laid out here, How confident are you in the Eagles' ability to exploit San Francisco's injuries and get this playoff run moving in the right direction? What makes this matchup even more compelling is how sharply the details favor Philadelphia if they are willing to lean into them without hesitation. When you zoom out, this isn't just about injuries or individual names, it's about structure versus structure. The Eagles are built to win games in the trenches, and that advantage becomes magnified against a San Francisco team that has struggled all season to protect Brock Purdy and open consistent running lanes. The numbers don't lie. The 49ers sit at the bottom of the league in sacks allowed and pressure rate, and that reality doesn't magically disappear in the playoffs. If anything, it becomes more exposed when the opponent has a defensive line that can rotate, stay fresh, and win one-on-one matchups the way Philadelphia can. This is where the Eagles' defensive front becomes the centerpiece of the entire conversation. Purdy has shown that when he's kept clean and the run game is functioning, he can execute Shanahan's offense at a very high level. But when pressure arrives early and often, his efficiency drops, his decision-making becomes rushed, and turnovers start to creep in. His record against top 10 defenses over the last few seasons reflects that trend clearly, especially in the most recent years. Against elite units, the production dips, interceptions rise, and the margin for error shrinks. This Eagles defense, especially since the midpoint of the season, has been playing at that level, allowing just 14.5 points per game since Week 8. That's not a small sample. That's an identity forming at the right time. And while a lot of attention naturally goes to the pass rush, the run defense is just as critical. San Francisco's offense is at its best when Christian McCaffrey is getting downhill, forcing linebackers to step up and opening space behind them. When that doesn't happen, the entire offense becomes compressed. That's why Nakobe Dean's expected return matters so much. His ability to diagnose, fill gaps, and close quickly gives Philadelphia a linebacker who can disrupt the timing of those runs before they ever get going. Add that to a defensive line that can control the point of attack, and suddenly those cutback lanes and second-level opportunities disappear. On the other side of the ball, the Eagles' offense is staring at an opportunity that frankly has to be taken advantage of. San Francisco's linebacker group is not just thin, it's vulnerable. Starting players who were on the street weeks ago or were healthy scratches because of coverage issues is not a sustainable formula against an offense with this much talent. This is where the Eagles' game plan must be decisive. Running the football isn't just about balance, it's about forcing those linebackers to step forward, hesitate, and get caught in conflict. Once that happens, the middle of the field opens up, and that's where this offense can do real damage. Dallas Goedert becomes a matchup problem again, not just because of his hands, but because of his ability to work through traffic and punish defenses that can't cover consistently at linebacker. The same goes for crossing routes. The efficiency numbers are there when Jalen Hurts throws them, yet they were underutilized throughout the season. In a playoff game, tendencies don't matter nearly as much as exploitation. If something works, you go back to it over and over until the opponent proves they can stop it. Against this version of the 49ers defense, that proof simply hasn't been there. And then there's Lane Johnson, looming over everything like a final variable that could swing the entire game. Even if he's not at 100%, his presence alone changes protections, alters how the 49ers approach their pass rush, and gives Jalen Hurts an extra half second that can be the difference between a throwaway and a game-changing completion. The emotional lift inside the locker room matters too. Teammates know what it means when Lane Johnson is on the field in January. It signals belief, urgency, and expectation. When you put all of this together, this doesn't feel like a typical wild card game. It feels like a measuring stick moment, a chance for the Eagles to prove that the struggles, the injuries, and the inconsistencies of the regular season didn't define who they really are. It's also a chance to expose a San Francisco team that is limping into the postseason and relying heavily on scheme to overcome personnel losses. Scheme can only take you so far when the other side can win physically. Now it's on the Eagles to execute, to stay disciplined, and to attack the areas that are clearly there to be attacked. If they do, this game can tilt quickly. If they don't, they leave the door open for a team that still knows how to capitalize on mistakes. I want to know what you think. The other layer that can't be ignored is how pressure changes decision-making on both sidelines once the game starts to tilt. If the Eagles come out and immediately impose themselves up front, this becomes less about play design and more about survival football for San Francisco. Shanahan is at his best when he can stay patient, layer concepts together, and keep defenses guessing with motion and misdirection. That entire approach depends on staying on schedule, second and short, third and manageable. When the Eagles force negative plays early, that rhythm disappears, and suddenly the playbook shrinks. That's where the Eagles' defensive discipline becomes just as important as aggression. Fangio's system is built to take away explosive plays, force quarterbacks to work underneath, and wait for mistakes. Against Brock Purdy, that patience matters. His numbers against elite defenses show that he will test windows, and when those windows close late, turnovers follow. The Eagles don't need to blitz recklessly to create chaos. They just need to win up front and trust the structure behind it. If they do that, the pressure compounds on every snap. Offensively, the Eagles also face a mental test. This is where playoff football exposes whether tendencies are habits or choices. If the middle of the field is open early and the linebackers can't carry routes, does the staff stay aggressive? Do they keep attacking, or do they drift back into conservative stretches that let a wounded opponent breathe? That question might decide the game more than any single matchup, because everything on tape says the opportunities will be there. What matters is whether Philadelphia commits to them without hesitation. There's also the emotional edge of playing at home in January. This building hasn't seen a home playoff loss since that Seattle game years ago, and that history carries weight. Veterans like Lane Johnson understand exactly what this environment can do to an opponent that's already dealing with injuries and uncertainty. Early success feeds the crowd, and once that happens, communication issues, missed assignments, and hesitation tend to follow for the visiting team. That's how games swing fast in the postseason. What's fascinating is that this game doesn't require perfection from the Eagles. It requires clarity. Know who you are. Know where the advantages are. Lean into them relentlessly. The roster moves, the injury returns, the matchup data, all of it points in the same direction. Philadelphia doesn't need to reinvent itself. It needs to trust what it does well and apply it with urgency. This is why the first quarter matters so much. If the Eagles establish control early, the pressure shifts entirely onto San Francisco to play from behind, something that neutralizes their run game and forces Purdy into longer developing concepts against a defensive front that can collapse the pocket. If that happens, the balance of this game changes completely. There's also a deeper conversation here about trust, and it runs through every phase of this team. Trust from the coaching staff and the players to execute aggressive concepts. Trust from the players that the game plan will put them in positions to win. And trust from the fan base that what we're seeing now is not a repeat of past frustrations, but a team that has actually learned from them. Playoff football has a way of exposing hesitation, and the Eagles can't afford that mentally, not against an opponent that still has a high ceiling if allowed to settle in. One of the biggest tests will be situational football. Third downs, red zone trips, and late half possessions are where narratives are created in January. Against the depleted 49ers linebacker group, third and medium should favor Philadelphia if they stay disciplined with route concepts and spacing. This is where crossing routes, tight end seams, and layered combinations force defenders to choose, and when those defenders aren't used to playing together, those choices become mistakes. Every successful conversion not only extends drives, it drains confidence from a defense that already knows it's undermanned. Red zone execution is another area where clarity matters more than creativity. The Eagles don't need trick plays near the goal line. They need precision. Force San Francisco to defend every blade of grass horizontally, then attack vertically when the opportunity presents itself. That's where having a healthy, confident offensive line becomes critical. If Lane Johnson is out there, even limited, it stabilizes everything. Protections become cleaner. The pocket feels firmer. Jalen Hurts doesn't have to rush decisions. Those small differences compound over 4 quarters. Defensively, tackling will tell the story early. Shanahan's offense is designed to turn short completions into explosive gains through yards after the catch. That only works if defenders miss tackles or take poor angles. Philadelphia has been sound in that area during the second half of the season, and that discipline has to carry over. Force the 49ers to earn every yard. Make them string together long drives without mistakes. History says that eventually, against a defense like this, mistakes will come. There's also the reality that playoff games often swing on 1 or 2 unexpected moments. A tipped pass, a busted coverage, a sudden momentum shift. The difference between teams that advance and teams that go home is how they respond to those moments. Do they tighten up, or do they reset and lean back into what works? This Eagles roster has been through enough highs and lows to know the answer has to be the latter. This game isn't about proving something to the league. It's about proving something to themselves. Proving that when the lights are brightest and the margin is thinnest, they can play fast, physical, and connected football for 60 minutes. If they do that, the path forward opens up in a very real way. If they don't, the questions only get louder. There's also the reality that playoff games often swing on 1 or 2 unexpected moments. A tipped pass, a busted coverage, a sudden momentum shift. The difference between teams that advance and teams that go home is how they respond to those moments. Do they tighten up, or do they reset and lean back into what works? This Eagles roster has been through enough highs and lows to know the answer has to be the latter. This